Hi, I'm Mike Reynolds, senior reporter covering the media industry with S&P Global Market Intelligence. Welcome to Media Talk, a podcast hosted by S&P Global, wherein the news and research staff explore issues in the evolving media landscape. Today, I'm joined by S&P Global Market Intelligence Kagan analyst Scott Robson, who specializes in TV networks. How's it going, Scott?
It's going well, Mike. How are you doing?
Good. Thanks for joining us today. We appreciate it. Scott's going to share some of Kagan's projections for cable revenue for 2024, as well as the impact of cord cutting into the recent Disney Charter Communications carriage pact. He's also going to weigh in on the upcoming NBA rights negotiations, the recently announced streaming JV between ESPN, Fox, and Warner Bros. Discovery, and his sense for what may or may not happen in the ongoing Diamond bankruptcy case. One thing that impacted 23 and will have an impact to some degree on 2024 with the writers and actors strikes that scuttled the traditional fall TV season on the broadcast side. Your sense for what may happen this year in terms of scheduling and a return to some normalcy?
Yeah, so the broadcast networks have done their best to replace some of the scripted shows that have experienced production halts due to the strike. This with reality and variety fare. I think the brunt of that pain was felt in the fall of 2023, and so 2024 shouldn't be greatly impacted by the lingering effects of the strikes. And I think overall, really, the valuable sports rights that the national broadcasters have is going to continue to buoy total revenues for the sector. And sports should help keep broadcast network CPMs afloat as well. Overall, the strikes, they had their impact in 23, should have a little bit of an impact in 24, but not enough to really move the needle.
Oh, that's a good deal. What about the cable side? Cord cutting continues to erode subscriber bases and in turn, audience and advertising potential. What's Kagan's revenue projections for 2024?
Yeah, so I think the cable networks are very vulnerable in this current environment. We currently have the sector declining about 2% in total revenue in 2024, and that's despite an influx of ad revenue from the Olympics and presidential election, albeit smaller than what the broadcasters are expected to bring in. So news and sports have really been holding the basic cable networks together. And at this point, ratings for cable news have been in decline, and sports are increasingly headed towards streaming services. You combine that with the fact that the original scripted content is really transitioning to streaming platforms. So we've seen networks like TNT and TBS stepping back from making new original content, and Warner Brothers Discovery has opted to shift those budgets into Max. And so that in combination with the emergence of the fast channels is really impacting the overall cable network industry. So I think these fast channels are starting to eat into viewing share for especially for library content on cable networks. So a lot of the cable networks, they've been airing blocks of reruns these days, and I don't think that's a sustainable strategy long term, as the fast channels are doing the same thing at no cost to
Exactly.
operators. Yeah,
Yeah, there's seemingly every week there's a new fast channel that is very content specific, and those things can only last for so long.
absolutely.
One of the big things that happened last fall was the Disney Charter contretemps. There was a blackout for about 12 days that ended right before, I think on September 11th, the first Monday night football game between the Jets and the Buffalo Bills. What do you make of the narrative that this was a transformative deal for the industry?
Absolutely. I think the dispute and the eventual new carriage agreement between Disney and Charter, who are arguably two of the biggest players in the game, was one of the most important stories of 2023 for the industry. I think there are a lot of niche cable networks out there that are vulnerable to being left out of future carriage deals as a direct result of this agreement that was forged. Previously, the cable network owners had the leverage in the negotiations and were able to demand the operators basically take all or nothing when it came to adding channels to their lineups. And so now the operators are pushing back. And I think companies like Warner Brothers Discovery and Paramount Global, who have these large portfolios of channels, are going to have to make some concessions to the operators and allow them to only carry the most popular networks. And then there's also the emergence of these hybrid packages, like the one that Charter is putting out that includes access to the streaming services like Disney Plus and ESPN Plus. I think those are also going to become more of a standard as you look across the offerings being put out by these cable operators.
Interesting. And we'll see how, again, as the renewals come up for the other big programmers with Charter and Comcast and DirecTV, how this will all play out in the next year or so. One thing that's coming up that's very important to cable is the NBA rights negotiations. TNT and ESPN, along with ABC, which has the finals, they've been in place for many years. Their contract ends after the 24-25 season. I think their exclusive negotiating windows ends at the end of April. Scott, what's your sense for appetite for NBA across continue with those companies and other programmers that want to get in?
Yes, so I think the NBA has seen the recent growth in media rights deals over previous contracts experienced by some of the other leagues and is looking to generate as much money as possible on this next deal. So there's discussions that they're eyeing 75 billion over 10 years, which would be a big step up from the roughly 2.7 billion per year under the current deal. So I see the potential for a deal that includes the traditional linear network partners like ESPN and TNT, but then also adds the likes of Apple, Amazon, and or Netflix to broadcast select packages of games throughout the regular season. I think that the NBA in-season tournament that just launched is a good
Right.
opportunity to add some of those nationally televised games into the fold on a streaming platform. But that being said, I think the finals will still live on broadcast for the foreseeable future, as those games need to be available to the widest possible audience. So I see rights spread out across a variety of players, both streaming and traditional.
Makes sense. I mentioned earlier, and some of this will probably be available here, the sports oriented JV that was announced from ESPN, and Warner Brothers Discovery, and Fox. Supposed to launch this fall of 2024. It's going to have 14 sports oriented channels from those players as well as ESPN Plus. What's your sense? How big of a deal is this for the media industry, the advertising industry, Scott?
Yeah, so when news first broke of these three companies teaming up for a sports streaming service, my initial thought was this is going to be big. After digesting the news, I don't know if this is the game changer that some other analysts are making it out to be. It's basically just another virtual multi-channel service, and while it does have a good amount of sports content, it is missing some key properties. For example, March Madness fans can't use this as a full replacement in 2025, as
Right.
CBS
Yeah.
still isn't included. And then on the pricing, I think it's going to cost at least $35 a month, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was as much as $45 a few months after launch. Now, that's still less than the most basic packages on your YouTube TV or Fubo TV, but you aren't getting as much.
No, not even close.
Exactly. I think it will still be appealing to some cost conscious sports fans, but I'm not sure if that demographic is big enough to really move the needle here.
Disney's been looking for a strategic partner or partners, maybe even with the leagues. There's also been plenty of buzz about Paramount Global being for sale. How much consolidation do you expect to see in the industry in the next year or two, Scott?
Yeah, so outside of the JV and Skinny Bumble, the bundle that was recently announced, I think Disney is still looking for a partner to launch the ESPN direct to consumer product that is set to launch in the fall of 2025.
Right.
I think a Verizon or Apple partnership would be beneficial in terms of spreading adoption of the service at launch and getting it in front of large user base. Then the rumors of the NFL and ESPN teaming up also sounds very interesting. There are a lot of synergies there as ESPN currently pays the NFL about 2.6 billion a year. And then the NFL has the NFL Network and the NFL Plus streaming service. So bringing those platforms into the ESPN fold could be beneficial for both parties. In terms of other consolidation and looking what's been going on in the news with Paramount Global, I don't know if there are many buyers out there. Byron Allen has thrown some bids around. I don't know how legitimate those are. Outside of that, I don't think there are many companies out there that are willing to take on a large portfolio of basic cable networks at this time, like the ones that Paramount Global had, which are targeted towards kids, or a section are targeted towards kids, and then another section kind of deal in legacy, music video channels. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out.
I gotcha. We're getting toward the end of time here. I got a couple more for you, Scott. All right. We had a wild card playoff game. Kansas City Chiefs, Miami Dolphins streamed on Peacock. Amazon is going to wind up having a wild card playoff game in next year's NFL playoff round. Your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think the transition to streaming is inevitable, but it sure is taking some time for it to happen. And I think it will continue to happen slowly over time. So, one playoff game this season, maybe two next season, so on and so forth. The Peacock playoff game was a huge streaming event, and the 23 million audience was the largest streaming audience on record. But at the same time, that game was the least watched NFL game during the wild
Right.
card weekend. So
That's right.
it really speaks to how linear still has a grip on video consumption and how slow this transformation is happening.
We've talked a lot about national. Now we got Diamond Sports, the largest regional sports network operator in the country. It's been in Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection for almost a year now. It's a messy, complex, ever-changing situation. Sorry to do this to you, Scott. Can you sum up your thoughts in a minute or so?
Yeah, I think the fate of Diamond Sports and the traditional RSN business model is set for massive disruption. I don't think Amazon adding the Bally Sports Plus app to its platform will provide significant growth in subscribers. You sure the cash injection might help the company stay afloat for another year or two. But really, I think the third party involvement in local sports media seems to be flawed. And I think that when you look at what Monumental is doing in DC, or what's happening in Houston with the teams taking control of the network, those types of models seem to be the best strategy going forward. I think the teams that have gone to local broadcast and streaming are making right by local fans, and they're also in good position for the long term. But the RSN model as a whole is really, doomed for long term.
We could speak to that in more depth at another point. But for now, that concludes our latest episode of Media Talk. I just wanted to thank Scott for spending a lot of time. We really appreciate it, Scott.
Thanks a lot, Mike. I appreciate it.
This is Mike Reynolds. Thanks to all of you for listening. We'll catch up soon on the next edition of Media Talk.